So one of the because we need to talk about all
Yes,
the
of course.
worldviews that exist. And as I mentioned, the word name Venkat Dulipala, he wrote the book
Yes,
in which he's arguing
yes,
about the
yes,
quest for the new Medina is much before
yes, 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 yes,
1940s, and uh, people
yes,
like Aisha Jalal and others have argued that it's more like a a bargaining chip. But so to say, the way you are arguing that Nehru was somebody who would gamble, so gambling on such a big population of
Deniement.
uh, I'm
Yeah,
talking about then Jinnah in that
yes,
correlation, that
yes,
if Jinnah is doing the same,
yes,
taking
yes,
Muslims and the idea of a separate state as a bargaining chip, and
yes,
then that actually ended up happening where the interest
yes,
of feudal elite Muslims is served more in the modern age Pakistan, and that led to an internal Muslim problem within India. And so,
yes.
so to speak, given the fact that as Hindu right and Congress were aware of the problems of minorities and issues and discourses and ideological differences, so to speak, Muslims were also aware.
Of course.
Muslim League was a product of post 1905 Bengal partition.
Yes,
It understood the underpinnings of majority, minority, the change of demography,
yes.
power after the fall of the Bengal, Muslim sovereignty state. So, in that context, this demand, which created a Pakistan, so to say, which we are not going to focus on what happened to that, but it created a kind of a political situations for Muslims in India that was so unfair to them, and which was visibly part of Jinnah's gauge, that he sometime, I think, if I'm remember right, he also argued, if I have to give up some amount of Muslim sovereignty within a partition state in India, I would readily give it for a Muslim sovereign state. So in that context, how do you see that the Muslim problem emerged in India as a byproduct of both Muslim, Hindu right and the Muslim, feudal elites?
No, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think the point, at any rate, is that Venkat Dupalia, for example, does bring up. I mean, he, like me, I does center on the question of UP
Hmm.
as being one of the areas where there were this thing, and he refers to what there was undoubtedly an element of Muslim separatism. I mean, he particularly refers to people like Maulana Usmani and people like that, ideologues like that. So, so essentially, that is the thing. But the point which he seems to really, where he really doesn't, where he kind of not exactly suppresses, but I mean, he certainly doesn't deal with any great thing, is the attitude of the Hindu and of the Congress to the legitimate concerns of
Of the
Muslims.
Muslims.
He just doesn't deal with that. He
Hmm.
talks about Muslim, and you see, the interesting thing about the book is this, that it came out at a time when there was a kind of this whole clash of civilizational things were whatever had come
Hmm.
onto the scene. Huntingdon was Clash of Civilizations was
Hmm.
flavor of the month, and this whole issue of Muslims being aggressive and being difficult and being violent and prone to
Hmm.
jihad and so on. That these issues were this thing. So therefore, it became very fashionable for him to attack, to say, well, look, partition was this thing. But I mean, fundamentally, what I would also say something very simply is that a lot of this revolves around the elect. I mean, we have to remember that the 1935 Constitution gave only 14%. Was 14% was the electorate.
Hmm.
So we can't actually make out very clearly, whether there was a Muslim majority for partition by virtue of looking at elections. Certainly the 46 election, because the point is that things had been polarized at that stage and whatever. And the point is that, but anyway, what we are talking about is basically 14%. And the thing is this, that, and it is often the case that people who are better off, people who are educated, um, maybe would be more inclined, particularly young graduates, for example, who would probably be very uncomfortable with getting, or would feel that there would be no scope for them for the sort of middle class in in a Hindu India. That there was fear on the part of the Muslim middle classes. So a lot of the, say, more well-off Muslims who would be enfranchised were played a disproportionate role in, say, for example, promoting the Pakistan thing or being members of the League or whatever. And they were not for religious reasons, they were for economic reasons. So
Mm,
there were a whole lot of factors because it's very difficult, frankly, at a time of, for example, at a time of partition when there was great polarization, there was great violence, there was discrimination, there was a sense of uncertainty and fear as to what the future held. And in
mm,
such circumstances, people do make decisions, whether to cross the border or whatever, and you have to see that in a context. It's not an ideological choice as simply as some people put it. I mean, someone like Patel, for example, kept saying that 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 for example, Muslims who have opted for Pakistan are somehow disloyal to India. But for example, if you were, I don't know, if you lived on the border of you were a Myanmar Muslim, you were in Alwar or something. I mean, where you were actually uh, you were actually subject to violence. I mean, what would you do? You would go to cross the border, not because you necessarily had an ideological this thing for Pakistan, but because, and the same way that Hindus did. I mean, there were a lot of Hindus who and Sikhs who left Punjab not because they wanted to, but because they felt that they would be subject to violence. So those questions are, they're all very unclear, but it's certainly not a simple issue of how many Muslims, what was the case. I mean, certainly what we have, because you see what I think, and this is a point which I try to, is that the notion of giving Pakistan was seen by the Hindu right as something which was a huge gift to the Muslims, that having gifted them this great thing, then nothing else needs to be done. That basically all their needs were satisfied, and therefore they can't really make any demands on society. And that, I think, is actually the most tragic thing, and it's something which has, frankly, bedeviled the Muslim question to the present day, because everyone has this crazy notion on the basis of what we don't know. Because, as I said, we don't know. We honestly don't know, and we will never know what prompted such and such a family to cross the border, or was it a choice, and how many and what percentage of the Muslims were actually listening? Because remember, a lot of Muslims would just remained in their woods. For example, those living in Pakistan, Punjabis and Bengalis, remained in Pakistan. And the point is, there was no question of opting for Pakistan. That's where they lived, right? So we're talking about a very small percentage of people, about some 7 million or so, who actually left India for either the west part of Pakistan or the east part of Pakistan. But we're talking about 7 million people. And now the reasons why they went, we don't know.
mm,
And so there could be two factors basically which would have some, which would give us some clue as to the popularity of Pakistan among Indian Muslims. One was obviously the question of the elections, and that I think is really ridiculous, because on a 14% franchise, you can't really make out a case. And secondly, on the question of migration, there could be hundreds of reasons why people have left. I mean, which really have no. I mean, it could just be a fact that your brother went across, and you may not want to go. Like in my family, I mean, one of my uncles father's brother went across, but we didn't. But the point was that 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 we can't say with any certainty what the thing is. Now, if you have a situation where you're really not sure about whether the Muslims wanted Pakistan, to assume that that Pakistan was somehow some great um, deliverance for the community, that it was some great gift, is absurd. Because I mean, why can you not see it by as a lot of the Hindu right see it? Well, look, good riddance to them. Um, we don't want them. We don't want to compromise our politics. We don't want to compromise our culture. We don't want um, you know we don't want these people to have a say in the future of our society in any substantial way. And remember, it was largely succeeded because post 1947, what was the population? The population of Muslims in India was 11%. So it was a small, it was it had gone down, and that was largely not because of Muslims going to Pakistan, largely because the two majority provinces of Punjab and Bengal hosted the largest Muslim populations. So the point is that what we have then is this situation that it's that on any footing, this argument that the Muslims wanted Pakistan. Well, first, we don't know whether they wanted Pakistan, and the fact that they got Pakistan doesn't again mean very much, because the reality is that I think there was certainly, and as I said, there is this other aspect of the thing which we again don't talk very much about, and that is the notion that really it suited the Congress Party at that time for it to be for these states to be in a sense politically neutered, because it kind of guaranteed a Congress hegemony for it. Well, it certainly guaranteed a hegemony for 3 decades after independence.